there could be a genetic predisposition to colorectal cancer in that population. And the first thing we had to do is do what's called an epidemiology study, a statistical study to try and figure out if colorectal cancer rates were high in that region. We found that they have some of the highest rates of colorectal cancer in the United States. So that was an important finding. And after that, I just started getting very public health oriented. If you are average risk, you want to get screened on time at 45. You do not want to, be like, I don't need to do it this year. I'll do it at 47 or I'll do it at 49. You may even need something like genetic testing to make sure you don't have a hereditary form of cancer, like called Lynch syndrome, which has very high rates of colorectal cancer and other cancers, and you may need to be screened decades before. So I just kind of wanted to tie in, this messaging into the early onset base as well.
So important because what it buys you is time.
Yes.
It buys you time. And in the end, if you're someone like me who's met your cancer, time is everything. Welcome back to From Carpools to Chemo, where we talk about what it means to truly be seen by our doctors, by our families, and by the systems that are supposed to keep us safe. Today's guest is Dr. Jordan Karlitz, Senior Medical Officer of Screening at Exact Sciences. He's a nationally recognized gastroenterologist, a researcher, and a fierce advocate for earlier, more accessible colorectal cancer screening. He is helping to lead the charge on innovation across the board. We'll talk about why screening saves lives, how new technologies are changing the game, and what it's going to take to reach younger patients, and of course, the providers who serve them. And because everybody has a story, we'll also dive into what song has carried him through the hardest moments of his career. So let's welcome Dr. Jordan Karlitz. It is your time to be seen. Welcome back, everybody, to From Carpools to Chemo, where we talk about what it means to truly be seen by our physicians, by our families, and by the systems that are supposed to keep us safe. Today's guest is Dr. Jordan Karlitz, Senior Medical Officer of Screening at Exact Sciences. He is a nationally recognized gastroenterologist, a researcher, and a fierce advocate for earlier and more accessible colorectal cancer screening. Thank heavens for people like Dr. Karlitz. He is helping to lead the charge on innovation in this space. And so we're going to dive into what and why screening is and why it saves lives, how new technologies are changing the game, and what it's going to take to reach younger patients. And of course, those providers who serve them. And because everybody has a story, we're going to dive into what music and mission has carried him throughout the hardest moments of his career. So, Dr. Karlitz, here we go.
You want me to start off with the musical question?
Oh my gosh, you want to jump to it? I don't know. That's my most favorite question along the way. Yeah, let's start with the music.
No, we could
let's
talk
go.
About that, and then I could go into my background. So the music could sort of set the stage for my background and kind of personal journey, how I got into colorectal cancer screening. But so music, I was thinking about this a lot, and I was trying to come up with one song, but I had a hard time doing that. So I would say it's more of a style of music, right? So
That's okay.
I really enjoy music that's rhythmic, upbeat, and kind of just keeps you moving. And I'll give you some examples of that. So I'm like a huge Bo Diddley fan. I don't know if people have heard of, probably have, but this is an old 50s blues person who invented the Bo Diddley beat. I really love old dub reggae from the 70s, some 80s new wave,
cool.
like New Order, but it's all kind of generally rhythmic beats, and it just spurs creativity in me. So I'll listen to this while I'm running, biking, hiking, and I'll come up with research ideas, public health ideas while I'm listening to this kind of music. It just kind of everything keeps you moving and kind of keeps your brain moving. So hard to come up with one song, but hopefully I got some particular artists in there.
No, this is great. So, and part of what we do on the show is not only help people to connect with experts in their own respective domain space, but also to understand, like, we're all people, we're all humans. We wake up, put our pants on the same way every day. And for most people, there is a beat behind it too. There's something we turn to that helps us feel like ourselves, that helps us get centered or in a creative flow or unblock or just help process the weight of the world and our professions and the intersection of all of those things, right? So when I was younger, My Girl is my song. Like if it comes on, my mom calls me. When I had like special birthdays growing up and I performed starting at a young age, our show choir, a bunch of people from our show choir showed up on the doorstep and started singing My Girl on my 16th birthday. Like that's one that kind of encapsulates that time period of life, but still comes all the way through. And ironically, there's a lyric in it that says, I've got so much honey, the bees envy me. And now with bee seen and kind of this metaphor of a hive coming together and each of us being worker bees on a mission to eradicate death by colorectal cancer, I go back to that My Girl and I'm like, I've got so much honey. It just takes on a whole different meaning, you know?
Yeah. No, I love hearing that. Again, it's hard for me to come up with one exact song. It's really more of this rhythmic beat stuff that just gets me moving, gets my brain going. And when I'm, like I said, when I'm running, jogging, hiking, biking, I'm listening to these things and I really will come up with ideas. Or if I'm working on a particular project, I may be kind of tweaking it in my head while I'm listening to these things. So yeah, I'm having a hard time coming up with
Don't worry about it.
So it's everything, but yeah, I'm glad.
Don't worry about it.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah. And we'll, maybe we'll figure something out. Or if you think of us when you're on a run or you have one of those like breakthrough moments, you can be like, this was what was jamming at that time. And we'll drop it on our Be Seen in the Wild playlist.
Back to you. Or if it comes to me during this podcast.
Hey,
I'm like,
all things are possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So tell us about your background. I can tell this beat, this music, and ultimately the roots of being a problem solver, creator. I sense that goes back to early times of life. Tell us about your career, how you came to gastroenterology and screening for cancer in particular.
Yeah, so I did my GI training in New York City. I was actually a resident at Columbia, and my mentor was a GI doctor. And, you know, when you're internal medicine residency during your first, and you're trying to figure out what specialty you're going to go into. And he was really a big advocate for GI for a variety of reasons, including the whole GI cancer screening things. He was an advanced endoscopist. So I ended up, doing fellowship at Albert Einstein in New York in GI. And then I was very briefly in chiropractic, but then I got a federal grant to go to New Orleans. This was several years after Katrina. So there was a lot of devastation to the healthcare system in New Orleans, and they were giving federal grants for people to come from all parts of the country to work in New Orleans. Okay. I ended up going to Tulane, where I was a full-time faculty member and also did a lot of adjunct work at LSU.
Okay.
And after a few years of being there, I started hearing these reports from people that there were just high rates of cancer in different regions of Louisiana. And in particular, this one area called the Acadian region, which is home of the Cajun population. Mm-hmm. People who may not be familiar, the Cajun population is actually a very large population in Louisiana. It's about 700,000 or 800,000 individuals, and they're what's called a genetic founder population. So the Cajun population came to southern Louisiana from northeast Canada in the 1700s, and they're part of a larger population. And when you have a founder population, you could get magnification of sometimes inherited disorders. So I was thinking, is it possible that there could be a genetic predisposition to colorectal cancer in that population? And the first thing we had to do is do what's called an epidemiology study, a statistical study to try and figure out if colorectal cancer rates were high in that region. And so I kind of just walked into our state tumor registry and I said, hey, I'm a GI doctor. I've been here for a few years. I'm hearing a lot of the GI fellows are talking about these high rates of cancer in this region. And could I design a study with you to try and figure out if colorectal cancer rates are disproportionately high in this Acadian region? So we actually used French language census data and ancestry data, and we were able to hone in on this region. And we found that they have some of the highest rates of colorectal cancer in the United States. So that was an important finding. And after that, I just started getting very public health oriented. So this study didn't prove that there was a genetic cause. But we ended up getting some grant funding to do some genetic testing, and we still think that may be a major driver in that region. But after this study, became really interested in colorectal cancer screening and prevention. And I was lucky enough to co-found and chair our first Louisiana colorectal cancer roundtable. And then
Awesome.
that sort of bridged me into national initiatives. So I ended up becoming a steering committee member for the National Colorectal Cancer Roundtable, where we started working on national initiatives. And then for 3 years, I was the PR chair for the American College of Gastroenterology. And me and a bunch of other people created a national service award for colorectal cancer screening called the Scopie Award. So I don't know if people have heard of it, but it's still around.
That's awesome.
So that was, so that I just got heavily involved in colorectal cancer prevention, screening. I also started doing a lot of research on early onset colorectal cancer, and some of the teams that I was on and team that I led. We helped provide some of the data along with lots of other amazing groups throughout the country and the world to shift the screening age down to 45. So that was my time in Louisiana. I was there for about 12 years. And then after that, I shifted to our health medical center, which is a large safety net hospital, where I was head of BI and professor at University of Colorado. And then I ended up going into industry.
Yeah. Tell me about that shift of going from not only academic medicine and frontline work as a physician to your current role at Exact Sciences.
Yeah, I feel like industry is great because in clinical medicine, a lot of times you're focused on one health system and you're in this one care team. So you get a detailed view, but it may be a limited view of what's going on in a healthcare system in the country. At a place like Exact Sciences, I get to work with all different team members. I work in medical affairs. So in medical affairs, we sort of we deal with the science and translate the science to the public and to health systems so that people understand what we're doing and what our clinical trials look like. But we also, I get a chance to work with research and development on new product development, individuals in government affairs, operations. So the meetings that I have every day are just fascinating because I'm sitting on all these different teams and you get a completely different view of healthcare. And the other thing is I get to travel around the country and I get to go into different healthcare systems. So I was pretty much, focused at Tulane and LSU and Denver Health and University of Colorado. But now I get to go traveling all over the country and I get to see what is happening in different systems. And you get to see what are the barriers to screening in these different systems. How do people overcome these barriers? If I learned something in one area of the country, could we apply that to another area of the country to enhance screening and prevention? So it's really amazing. And I think Exact Sciences has a great focus on public health and health equity. And then the last thing I'll say is, we're going to talk a little bit more about colorectal cancer screening, Cologuard, which is a stool-based test that uses a DNA signature to look for precancerous polyps and colorectal cancer. But there are other products available at Exact Sciences that sort of span the cancer care continuum. So I get to work on those things as well. So that's really been my journey. The last thing I'll say about all this is I am active clinically. So I still do some pro bono procedures at the VA and at the University of Colorado, which I really enjoy because when you're in industry, you get this great view, but you still want to be on the ground doing colonoscopies, endoscopies, and seeing patients because it just brings everything all together.
Oh, totally. And I think, we get started in a certain path after a certain sort of purpose. Sometimes that's even linked to our passions as well. Yeah. That's nirvana, right? But as our expertise evolves and certainly in your role and the amount of influence and impact that comes from not only the research, but the application of it.
Yeah, no, you set the stage really well and you've already hit some of the key points. So, number one is colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer in the United States. And it's also obviously a global problem as well. So there's a huge public health issue here with colorectal cancer. And you already mentioned this, that it is actually preventable and treatable. If you have tests that could detect this at an early stage when it's more treatable, or you have tests, including non-invasive tests that could detect colorectal polyps, which are precancerous, those could be removed to prevent colorectal cancer. So it's a big public health problem, but we do have answers to this problem. through colorectal cancer screening. And then the last major point I'll make about, sort of the intro to this issue is that there are still 48 million individuals in the United States alone who are not up to date on colorectal cancer screening. And I do want to, use this time a little bit to talk to the audience about different types of individuals and colorectal cancer. So there are average risk individuals who don't have any concerning symptoms. So like they don't have blood in their stool or persistent abdominal pain and things like that. Or they don't have a family history of colorectal cancer or even other cancers. So these are average risk individuals. These individuals should start screening on at age 45 for colorectal cancer. And then there are high risk individuals who may have a significant family history of colorectal cancer or even other cancers, and also may have concerning symptoms. Those are not average risk individuals. Those individuals really need what's called diagnostic testing, like a colonoscopy, to try and figure out what's going on. But again, in average risk individuals, tests like Cologuard are really critical in the first option. And they also, a lot of the non-invasive tests like Cologuard, and then you already touched on this, because we do have PI shortages, physician shortages. We have, in some cases, there are procedure backlogs. And so, these non-invasive tests are really critical to reach those 48 million individuals that are not up to date screening.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because, if I put on my entrepreneurial business hat, we look at total addressable market, or TAM, right? I mean, this is a massive marketplace, a massive population that the standard of care suggests, and not just suggests, recommends strongly this type of screening, yet people aren't doing it. And the colonoscopy at age 45 plus is recommended for a range of reasons. People are really hesitant or nervous to have that done. And the range of reasons as to why it differs like the colors of the rainbow, right? As we look at Cologuard, for example, the reason I love it so much for a range of reasons is the efficacy. And it would be great to unpack why that matters for people that might be listening, or even if you're listening and there's someone that you really think should hear this, like, this is the part. Look at the timestamp, listen here, because some people will say the best test is the test that gets done. Sure. You want to make sure the efficacy of that test is something that you can rely on and that you can have confidence around. And that's where Cologuard comes into play for me in particular.
Yeah, no, so I'm glad you brought that up. So I think, test efficacy, the metrics of the test, how well does it perform?
Yes.
That's critical because we wanted to detect cancer earlier and we wanted to detect precancerous polyps as well. So I can give you, some statistics on the Cologuard test. So we have a new iteration of Cologuard called Cologuard Plus. The data for that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year. So I'm from that particular clinical trial. But again, this is us, and it's it's out in use. And Cologuard Plus is able to detect 95% of colorectal cancers, which is a very, very high number. This compares to about a 71 sensitivity for FIT testing. People may have heard of that. That's the fecal immunochemical test. That's only looking for microscopic blood or hemoglobin in the tool. So much higher sensitivity for Cologuard. The other thing I want to talk about, I'm a gastroenterologist, right? So I'm used to going in, doing colonoscopies, and taking out polyps. Cologuard actually has a detection for polyps as well. So when you look at what are called advanced precursor lesions, these are larger polyps or polyps with a certain type of look under the microscope. We could detect about 43% of those. But when you look at a type of polyp, which I'm very interested in as a GI doctor, these are polyps with what's called high-grade dysplasia. So these are cellular changes. So when you get a polyp removed, it goes down to the lab. A pathologist looks at it under the microscope, and they kind of look at the cellular changes. And there's this change called high-grade dysplasia, which means that it's kind of very close to becoming cancer, but it's not yet cancer. So those are the ones, these are these high-risk lesions that we want to detect. And Cologuard could detect those 74% of the time. And that's on a one-shot test, right? So another thing you want to talk about with non-invasive test, Cologuard, is adherence, right? So you want people to be doing this test over a lifetime, right? You get it done once. If it's negative, you want to repeat it in 3 years. And if it's negative again, repeat it again and again and again, because it's this cumulative detection that's really important, right? If new polyps develop or cancer, new polyps in between these intervals, you want to keep doing it in order to have, repeated chances for detecting these things. Or it's not just one-shot application of the test, it's over time. And I will say the adherence to Cologuard, we do measure this. And we know that about 71% of individuals that get a Cologuard test will adhere to completing the test within 28 days, which is very high. And then the other thing is we're able to measure repeat testing adherence. So your second round of Cologuard, your third round of Cologuard, those adherence rates go even higher into the 80s and sometimes 90s. So once people kind of get in this program, they like what they see and they want to keep going.
So let's talk about someone who hasn't done anything. They decide to do Cologuard and they have a positive result. What happens next?
Results. The patient is, one of the things I do want to talk about is the navigation program. So when you get a Cologuard test order, there is a digital navigation system that can send text messages to somebody's phone or email, and it reminds them that you have to get this test completed, right? And then when the test is resulted, the patient and the provider both have an opportunity to see the results, right? So it's critical that you actually see your positive test. Sometimes if you're using potentially in other types of tests, if they don't have programmatic navigation built in, there could be a risk that the result may not get back to you. And let's pause on this for a second too, because I have heard a number of firsthand real life stories of people who either get misinformation back, no information back, or don't even realize that they should have any information coming back. Right. And that includes after someone gets a colonoscopy. Right. So that follow-up of someone getting the assurance as you're coming out of that screening protocol to say, hey, we found a few polyps, they're out, nothing to worry about. Right. That follow-up to know what was detected. And in this case, around the results of your test, you have the power in your hands. It comes to you and your physician. The same in terms of your own advocacy for your health to follow up and say, hey, you took something out of my body. I know I shouldn't worry. Can you tell me the results of what that is? Why? Because it changes that screening protocol, just like you're talking about, right? If it comes back, you have a negative result, repeat in 3 years, continue on that path for your lifetime, right? What advice would you have for people about, seeking this out and really the power of having that kind of information at your fingertips in the way that Cologuard provides and even more broadly under other forms of surveillance? Yeah. And I think you hit on a core thing is being an advocate, right? Sometimes, unfortunately, the health system, there could be lapses and information lapses. So you definitely, as an individual, a patient, you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to stay on top of these things for any kind of medical testing. With the digital navigation system that I was talking about, I think Exact Sciences and the Cologuard protocol gives individuals the tools they need to be able to get the result, understand the meaning of the results. That if it's positive, you need to get a colonoscopy, right? And then, obviously, is getting the colonoscopy, and then that's the gastroenterologist, and sometimes other providers do colonoscopies as well. Generally, for the most part, it'll be a gastroenterologist. And if we find polyps or something like that, as you mentioned, your interval will be change, right? If you have a normal colonoscopy, you might not need one for many years, but if you have polyps, and you may need one soon. So people just need to stay on top of these things. If they don't hear back about test results, did you have to be an advocate and make sure that you get it? Because, things fall through the cracks sometimes, unfortunately.
That's right.
So, yeah.
I even met someone recently who they said, I through Be Seen, they were encouraged to go and do just that, to be seen. And they went through a colonoscopy and they had precancerous, actually not true. They had polyps removed. They were told, don't worry, it's out. I said, if you don't mind my asking, did you get results back? Do you know if it was considered precancerous or not? Oh, no, I didn't hear. They follow up and they said, oh, thank goodness you had me touch base with my physician. They said, yes, it was confirmed precancerous and I have to go back in for a colonoscopy in 7 years. I said, right. Okay, hold on. Would you mind touching base with them again? Just because when people have heard that before, it typically is 3 years or less, depending upon the results that require that follow-up. They follow up and the physician said, oh my goodness, yes, that was inaccurate information. It's not 7 years, it's 3 years, right? So this type of understanding and closing of the loop is so important for a range of reasons. But misinformation is so easy, and I believe unintentionally, because the systems are just, they're just not there yet. They're not foolproof.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a really important point that you're raising. The other thing is, so if you get a colonoscopy and you got polyps, and let's say it's a 7-year interval, I would mark it on your own calendar, right?
Totally.
Because a lot of these offices will have kind of a built-in recall system. I don't know what's going to happen in 7 years, right? So you kind of have to keep it, on your own calendar. And also, if something changes in between that 7 years, if you suddenly develop rectal bleeding or something like that, you need to notify, your provider about what's going on. And the other thing with, now that we're talking about messaging, I know that, early onset colorectal cancer, we were touching on this before, but screening on time at age 45 is critical, right? Like that's
so important.
That's a message that we definitely want to get across in this podcast. So if you're average risk, and we already define what average risk means, right?
That's right.
No symptoms, family history of colorectal cancer. If you are average risk, you want to get screened on time at 45. You do not want to, be like, I don't need to do it this year. I'll do it at 47 or I'll do it at 49. And one of the ways that we could get people to get screened on time at 45 is actually something called lead time messaging. So talking about colorectal cancer screening well before age 45, right? Because if you just show up in your provider's office, you never saw the provider before, you're 45 years old, and they're like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to draw this blood, and now I want to talk colorectal cancer screening. You may not be ready to, kind of go and get it done. But if you're getting lead time messaging for, years before, you'll be ready when you're 45. Yes. The other thing is when you have lead time messaging, it gives providers opportunities to get your family history and to figure out if you're having symptoms. And if you have a significant family history of cancer, you may need to be screened well before 45, or you may even need something like genetic testing to make sure you don't have a hereditary form of cancer, like something called Lynch syndrome, which has very high rates of colorectal cancer and other cancers, and you may need to be screened decades before 45. So I just kind of wanted to tie in, this messaging into the early onset space as well.
So important. And especially, for my children, I have 3 young boys, their screening protocol, because of my diagnosis at 39, but my symptoms started long before that, before finding my stage 3B rectal cancer, right? And so when we talk about, conversations about our health, about our butts, about poop, about what others have experienced, these typically have been deemed improper or silenced or for whatever form of societal, familial, cultural norms. And talking about this with your loved ones, with your siblings, your cousins, aunts, uncles, children, so important, because what it buys you is time. It buys you time. And in the end, if you're someone like me who's met your cancer, time is everything. And that's why we are so darn passionate about getting this word out and this message, and the important part that there are things for you to be able to do. We're not trying to add this to your to-do list just for the heck of it or for capitalism or to make money or any of these things. It's literally life-saving intervention. And I could have avoided a lot of what I went through had these specific tools and techniques been applied to me earlier. And that's part of why I want other people to know so much about this. And so for a resource like Cologuard Plus, for other blood-based, non-invasive screening methodology that is continuing to be on the cusp of innovation, how do you see these tools reshaping adherence and access in particular for people? And what would your message be to two kind of different groups? One, to the physicians on the front lines, and the other are to, people that may have never even heard the words Cologuard Plus, poop stool-based tests, or the word colonoscopy without, thinking of, perhaps what it was like years and years ago, where it would leave people with a very long gastric experience after, after getting the procedure completed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I think it's always worthwhile to reiterate the statistics about the 40 million average risk individuals that are not up to date with screening. And again, talking about the backlogs, they're not every place has a procedure backlog, but there certainly are some places where, it could take a long time to get a colonoscopy, and there are, projected PI physician shortages. So we have this opportunity with non-invasive tests, including high quality tests like Cologuard, to really go after those 48 million unscreened individuals. I think that's really important. But you want to, the high quality test is really important. You want a non-invasive test to detect cancer at an early stage, and also to be able to detect rectal polyp. So I think that's the key thing.
What if somebody hears this today? They're not yet 45. They know people have gone through this, and they're like, I want to get Cologuard done now. Is that something that they can do? How should they go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, generally our label is average risk. And so that is, 45 plus. When you're talking about, younger individuals, that would be, not something that's part of our label. But again, talking about colorectal cancer, critical to know your family history, because you may need screening before 45. Mm-hmm. Critical to act early on symptoms, to avoid delays.
When we say screening before 45 based on family history, would those people still be candidates for a Cologuard type screening, or is it something where they should have, some sort of different screening out of the get-go?
Really, where Cologuard focuses on 45 plus, and when you start talking about higher risk individuals that maybe based on a family history that may need screening before 45, that would generally be colonoscopy. And again, if you have symptoms, it's what's called diagnostic testing. That's not screening anymore. So that also would be colonoscopy. But just to set the stage, Cologuard is really approved for individuals that are 45 plus. Again, you want to get screened on time at 45. Can't say that. Don't let it, lapse years.
Yep. So get that pattern started and get moving forward. Why there's another statistic. There's two that are really concerning to me. So one is for people that would fall into that early onset sort of definition. So this is people that are under the age of 50. And so if we just look at the average risk, that standard of care, so from age 45 up through, the day before you turn 50, statistics right now show us that 89.1% of that population have yet to be seen at all.
Yeah.
And, for all ages, also concerning to not have these screening protocols applied. Why do you think these screening rates are still so much lower than suggested? And frankly, I think than they should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just because of the relatively recent guideline change. People are still associating, well, not everybody, but a lot of people are still associating it with age 50, and they do not even realize that it's been shifted down to 45. And that's why all of this public health awareness, things like this podcast are really important to get the word out on 45. I know our research group has done a lot of work on people looking at colorectal cancer in that actual age range between 45 and 50. And what we saw that rates of colorectal cancer are increasing. Well, actually, I would say more, the data is actually a little bit more in the 40 to 45-year-old range before people are thinking about screening. And what we've seen is that, I guess, generally speaking, in people in their 40s, there is an increase in colorectal cancer incidence and also an increase in the proportion of advanced stage disease.
Right.
So I actually do want to correct myself. So the study that we did was actually in 46 to 49-year-olds.
Okay.
All that are in between 45 and 50. And what we saw is that there's an increased incidence rate of colorectal cancer, and these individuals are more likely to be diagnosed with advanced stage disease. So again, sort of supporting the argument that we need to be getting people screened on time at age 45. But if you actually look at other younger age groups, you see the same kind of pattern. So people
That's right.
in their early 40s, their 30s, and even down into their 20s, you're seeing this increase in colorectal cancer incidence and this increasing likelihood to present clinically with advanced stage disease.
And again, that's where these topics that are taboo or not discussed for whatever reason or deprioritized, we are just losing time.
Yeah.
We're just losing time.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if we could talk about some of the barriers that we're facing.
That would be great. And it's one thing to have policy that supports earlier screening, very important for a range of reasons, like insurance and so on and so forth. But I'd love to talk about that. And also, how do we build trust in systems where people historically have maybe been dismissed or misdiagnosed or frankly harmed from some of these sorts of studies?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, because I've been a clinical GI doctor for years before I was in industry, I think a lot about barriers. And I also worked at safety net hospitals, Tulane, LSU, and Denver Health. These are safety net hospitals with, very populations that are very underserved, hard to get for various reasons, individuals, and for screening. And I think, some of the key barriers I think you already touched on one of them is stigma surrounding colorectal cancer screening. So I think public health messaging like we're doing right now, advocacy groups, colorectal cancer runs and walks, all these things, get the word out. But the other thing I want to say about the stigma is that when I'm talking to somebody who may be on the fence about colorectal cancer screening, I'll be like, this is a national effort, right? You're not alone, right? It's not like you're the only person being, everybody needs this screening when they reach a certain age. And so you are not alone in this. And I think it makes people almost feel like they're part of a team, like a national team that needs to address this public health problem. So I do like messaging that. Yep. We already touched on, the decreased access to gastroenterologists. That's why non-invasive tests like Cologuard are so important. A big one is no provider recommendation. So unfortunately, people can end up going to the provider or doctor, whoever, over and over again and may not get a recommendation for screening. And, it may be that they have a number of other medical problems and it just, the provider doesn't have enough time to bring it up. And that's where you have to be an advocate for yourself and say, hey, I saw this in the news or I looked into this podcast. I know that I need to be screened at 45, and remind the provider I'm interested in this. I think a few other barriers, fear of finding out, what if I have this? What if I have that? And what I'll say to that is, would you rather find out that you have a polyp or a very early stage cancer or late stage cancer? So that's another one. Some other big ones that I want to touch on, because I know these are in the public, these are, these things could be weighing heavily on people. Cost and insurance coverage. The company has worked very hard to get coverage for Cologuard. So 96% of patients will not have any out-of-pocket costs.
And is that with insurance, if you have, insurance?
Yeah, so that's if you have insurance.
Okay.
There's also new legislation that's in place. So if you have a positive stool-based test like Cologuard and you need a colonoscopy,
Yep.
Years ago, there was a lot of out-of-pocket, even not that long ago, there was a lot of out-of-pocket copays and things like that. But there's new legislation in place that should prevent copays and out-of-pocket costs if you have a colonoscopy as a follow-up after a positive stool-based test. So I definitely want the public to know that.
That's huge.
Pushed for years on that, and it's been successful.
That's massive. I'll share personally because my husband is very open about this. He just turned 45 this year. Because of what our family has experienced the week of his birthday, he went in and went straight to colonoscopy. He had 6 polyps discovered, 3 confirmed precancerous. The entire procedure was covered as a wellness visit.
Yeah.
Because he did not have any symptoms. He was at that age. And sometimes I think people think, oh my gosh, how could I possibly not only make the time for this, but also afford this? And that was really surprising to the two of us, frankly. So this legislation is not to be underestimated about having a positive result from a stool-based test like a Cologuard Plus, and having assurance that the financial ramifications of going to the next step will not bring a massive financial burden to the individual going forward. That's huge.
Yeah, and I think patients need to know that, but actually providers need to know that too.
That's right.
And in our experiences when I kind of travel the country and talk to different health systems and groups, providers, sometimes they're not aware that, that there's been legislation for this. So I think it's really important to educate, not just the patients, public, but also providers and even healthcare systems. That's legislation that a number of people and organizations have worked on for years has been successful. And that's a big dent has been made in that issue.
That's huge. And with all that's changing from a legislative perspective, is this something that's at all under threat or in discussion, or is it something that we can have assurance that, remains moving forward?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything to that end that this would be a threat, but obviously, we're constantly looking, to make sure that there isn't anything, and we would be on top of that. Not just Exact Sciences, but lots of public health groups, interest groups that would not want any changes.
Sure. I mean, when it's fought for so long and finally has a breakthrough like that in the interest of public health, you certainly want that to remain in practice. How can people like me or people that might be listening, how can we help with those frontline physicians, be it our internist, general practice, family practice, even OBGYNs? Like, how can we help with this sort of information? What advice would you have? Because it's continual evolution.
You mean spreading the awareness of some of these policy changes? Just
screening and policy. Yeah, just to be able to make sure that this is front and center.
Yeah, I think it's getting involved in your community. So if there are walks and runs and marches, colorectal cancer awareness month, get out there, like sit at a booth at the local park that may be sponsored by your health system, and, maybe even let your provider know. Be like, oh, I'm a patient, but I just want you to know I'm really excited participating in this run or walk. And it can bring attention. I think it's really community-based, your local community. And, the National Colorectal Cancer Roundtable has this initiative, 80% every community, right? So you don't want just a blanket reaching 80% CRC screening success. You want 80% every community, meaning that
that's right.
There's a community that's 100%, but then there are a bunch of communities that are 30%. We don't want to forget about those communities that are 30%, even if the national average is 80%. So
that's right.
Getting out there, that means paying attention to what is happening in your local hospital, getting out there with, colorectal cancer walks and, whatever you can do, and pull the providers in. If you're a patient, just maybe let them know somehow that, this is something that I'm really interested in. I want to be a patient advocate. And if screening was successful, let people know.
Yeah, it's so important. And I would encourage if if that has been your experience, today, set a goal for yourself to share that with 3 other people that you care about, because truly it can save their lives. It can change their lives. And the ripple effects of the people that depend upon those 3 that you care about are so wide reaching. Yes, recently we pulled together all of the care team that helped save my life. And my husband said, not only did you save my wife, you saved our family. And don't think for a second that there aren't wide-reaching ripple effects from just having one brave conversation.
Yeah.
I am so grateful, Jordan, for this conversation, and our time has run out. There are a number of topics I would love for us to go deeper on. So, maybe follow up in the future. But for now, we have one question that we ask all of our guests to close. And so I would love to close on this.
I think there are 2 quick things. One of them is touching on, there's just so much to say. One thing is health equity, how to address individuals that may have felt that they've been left out of the, cancer care or screening continuum. Yeah. And I would say, one really critical part of that is clinical trials and making sure that we have diversity in clinical trials. And so I know at Exact Sciences, we've been very focused on that. Diversity in clinical trials is really important. For a reason, obviously we want results in clinical trials to be generalizable to the entire population, not just sub-segment of the population.
That's right.
We also want to build trust. So when patients are included in clinical trials, they're going to be, more confident in research that's being conducted.
That's right.
Be more likely to, participate in the trial. And also if a test becomes approved and used in the community, then they might be, more likely to be an advocate for that test. They feel like they've been included in the clinical trials. So that's, a really key point. And then the second point I'll make is that I know this didn't come up, but, there are a number of, different technologies, that are coming out now. One of them is a blood test, for rectal cancer screening. And that could be, obviously options are really important, but there can be some, sometimes limitations in detection of precancerous polyps and even stage 1 colorectal cancer. So, I would make sure that, to people listening to this podcast that, they want to be educated consumers of tests. And so, make sure you understand, the tests that are being offered to you and, risks and benefits, pros and cons of all of these different tests. And that's not just for colorectal cancer screening, it's for any cancer screening test, and just general healthcare consumption in general. So,
no, it's exactly right. And that's why people saying that the best test is the one that gets done. And fundamentally, I just flat out disagree with that, because if a test is completed and it doesn't have a high standard, it doesn't have a proven efficacy rate that can allow you to sleep well at night. But guess what? You don't even know that. That's a real problem for me, because the injustice of that is just off the charts. And so knowing that you're going to take the time and you're going to do this and you are going to give your confidence on your life on that particular test, you better make darn sure that the efficacy matches your level of confidence after it's completed.
Yep. Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm optimistic about innovation in this space. Yeah. I truly, truly believe that we do in my lifetime have the ability to eradicate death by colorectal cancer. It's why I've dedicated my time around the clock to this work and launching the Be Seen Foundation and launching this podcast and trying to normalize conversations about this. But it all comes back to our truth and our voice and us being able to live our best life possible. And so I am so grateful for you spending this time. My last question is, what does it mean to you, Dr. Karlitz, to be seen?
Well, I do want to first of all, I do want to thank you. Your story is inspirational, and it's truly an honor to be on the podcast and to have this dynamic and, back and forth with you, where I think we've just brought up all of these really important topics. But yeah, being seen, I think it kind of goes back to being your own advocate. You want to be seen as an advocate for yourself. And,
Yes.
we talked about this being your own advocate in many different settings and making sure you get screened 45, making sure you know your family history, not assuming that your provider knows something about you, right? And that you're going to have to proactively feed information, and also being an advocate on your consumer. What tests are being offered to me? What are the pros and cons of these tests? What is the advocacy, which we talked about, right? So I think, to me, those are really important. You need to be seen as a patient and a healthcare consumer. And I hate to even use the word consumer, but you got to be an advocate for yourself in the healthcare system as a patient.
That's right. Before my cancer diagnosis, I worked at the intersection of entertainment and technology. And we talk about consumption of media, right? Like we can think of consumption of food. We can think about consumption of all sorts of things. But you are the end user. You are the best expert of your body, of your mind, of your health. And it takes a lot to speak up about that when sometimes we might think somebody else has it under control for us. So I have loved this conversation. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you. And please pass along our gratitude to everyone at Exact Sciences, and specifically those creators and upkeepers of Cologuard and the GI work, because it tremendously matters and is a critical part to us being able to do away with people losing their lives far too early from a preventable disease. Well,
thank you again. Again, an honor to be here and an honor to hear your story, and just so inspirational. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Whew. That was Dr. Jordan Karlitz, reminding us that colorectal cancer is not just treatable, but often preventable if we catch it early enough. Through his leadership at Exact Sciences and his years as a gastroenterologist, physician, and researcher, he is no doubt changing the way we talk about screening, from something that people fear or delay to something that they understand and trust. Confidence is not to be underestimated. So I have an ask for all of you. If you're listening and you're 45 or older, or you're under 45 and possibly experiencing some symptoms, or have a family history, please don't wait. Talk to your provider, send them an email today, ask about your options. And screening is not a one-size-fits-all anymore, and early detection is the key to buying you more time. For me, it saved my life. So to learn about more non-invasive options like Cologuard and how Exact Sciences is pushing the field forward, please visit exactsciences.com. And if this episode helped you see screening in a whole new light, sharing is caring, just like we tell our kids. You never know whose life you might help change just by sending a link of this conversation. So until next time, huge thanks to my producer and creative partner in crime, Mike, and our editorial team that makes this show possible. Remember, your body is not broken. It's communicating, so let's just listen. See you soon.